So the new champion, Akshan. One of the reasons why I am doing like a little video on it is because I've seen a ton of people with kind of misconceptions about what this champion is actually going to do, what kind of place he's going to have in the meta. Is he going to be broken? Is he going to be bad? Like, what role is he going to be? And I actually think this champion is one that's very clear where he will probably end up going due to multiple different factors, and also it's sort of a thing of whenever there's kind of change to the game or something that's implemented that's kind of flashy or makes everybody think, wow, that's crazy. Like, most of the time these things, if they're on a really kind of strong champion, like if we look at something like Gwen, like when you're playing into multiple melees and you're playing in lane and you have this ability that just stops her taking any damage, then that's a very huge impactful ability, because if you play it properly it can do a lot. Now the thing with Akshan is there's a lot of things with him that don't really make sense or fit in, and I really don't think this champion's going to be very good whatsoever, like on release. I think this champion's gonna be a bit meh. I mean, you're gonna see kind of really big plays where somebody gets very fed on him, but it's completely different. So one of the main things about this champion is obviously he only has 500 attack range, which means he's completely kind of shifted out of bot lane already, because with only 500 attack range he's going to get beat up by those with a large attack range, and he doesn't really have the survivability around that. So I mean, another thing with bot lane as well is because of how the walls are positioned, his E is actually very kind of easy to cancel, much easier than if you're playing in, say, mid lane, because if you've got a massively stacked wave coming into you in either bot or top, then it's much easier it's much harder to actually navigate through that without getting knocked off your rope, which is going to be a really big kind of barrier to people actually picking him up. And in advance now, his E is going to be the one thing that's going to really restrict anybody from picking this champ up and playing him, partly because it's not great to use, but partly also because it's just a very difficult and awkward skill shot to actually use. From what I've seen so far, it's very janky in the way it works. So he only has that 500 attack range. So now if we move on, so we'll go over his abilities. So his passive, when he uses basic attack, he fires an additional shot dealing 50% AD physical damage, increased to 100 AD% AD against minions. If he cancels a shot, he gains movement speed, and that's based on his attack speed. So that decays over 1 second, but still. The additional shot also benefits from critical strike modifiers. So what this means is you want to be critting with your second hit, which means this champion is kind of forced into a build path where if you go for a lethality build path, which makes it easier for him to actually function in, say, mid lane, it's very awkward, because if you're against a lethality user, they'll be getting longsword after longsword after longsword, and then you end up in a kind of position where they can kind of always reset and you can't. So that's kind of a really big thing that I think is going to definitely separate him from a lot of the AD mids. And a lot of the AD mids, if you look at, say, put Zed versus an ADC, like, it's just a matter of time before Zed becomes powerful enough to kind of one-shot that ADC, especially at level 6 if he sets his kill range up right. So this champion is going to be very squishy in mid, and I mean, if you camp him early, then I think he's going to very much struggle, because you need to use your E as an escape tool rather than a tool to go in and do damage, meaning you have one less ability. So anyway, so on to the next. So his basic attack and abilities apply stack to affecting enemies for 5 seconds, stacked up to 3 times and refreshing on subsequent applications. This can actually be procced on multiple things at once, which is really good. It's not kind of like Vayne where it's only on one thing, it's on multiple at once. The third stack consumes them all to deal bonus magic damage, which is actually pretty nice, because that bonus magic damage, if you're playing into a laner that has taken armor runes, then this is actually going to give a little bit more of a punch, and that's kind of good sometimes. If the target is a champion, it grants him 40 to 300 plus basic bonus AD shield for 2 seconds, but they can only be used a few seconds. So this also indicates that they want this champion to be built more crit, purely because it's based on his bonus AD. So you want to be stacking as much bonus AD as possible, and obviously lethality has a price. So lethality is overall cheaper to build, but it's going to give you that early game impact, but later on in the game you're not going to do as much, which I think one of the big things with this champion, the point where he's going to be most effective is kind of mid game, between maybe say levels maybe 8 to 14 maybe, where that's gonna be kind of his point to pop off, and then after that he's gonna start falling off and he's not gonna be as good. Maybe 12, 13, but he's gonna have that mid game window. Now this shield as well, obviously that's very good for trades in mid lane, so you know, if he does get on top of somebody, that's very good for him. But so let's go on to his Q. Now, one of the things that screams out about his Q is that, actually we'll read through it first. So, hurls a boomerang in a target direction, granting sight of the area along its path, which is pretty nice. It means you can kind of use your Q to check brushes, check objectives, see if they're actually on it, which is actually very good. It deals physical damage and to enemies hit and reveals them for 1 second, as well as extending the range every time it hits an enemy. So if it hits a champion, he gains 40% movement speed, but this can also proc on minions too. So his Q is a really, really big kind of wave clear tool, kind of similar to something like a Sivir. So it does, so at level 1 it's 60 mana, and he does have 350, but he's probably going to abuse presence of mind because he is going to want to get something like PTA so that he can really amplify these 3-hit passives and get these really short but aggressive burst trades, kind of similar to what kind of Lucian does. But yeah, that's what I think he'll probably go towards. But people might kind of think of something else, and that might be the preferred rune. So at max range, it returns and applies the same effect. So again, it's just the same as Sivir pretty much. And the damage is reduced against non-champions. This is to make sure that you can't completely just one-shot waves too early. That's really big. I mean, his base scalings are, I mean, nothing exciting. Like, I don't look at these base scalings and think, wow, this is a crazy high amount. But his total AD scaling is actually pretty nice here. So this is a considerable scaling. So this could actually be really good. But this is another thing. This is why I don't think he's going to be in something like support, because he really relies on early gold to kind of snowball a game. So I think he's going to be mid lane or top. It's already been somewhat confirmed that he can't really clear the jungle out. So that's, you know, a shame. But we will see when he actually comes out. But overall, doesn't really matter if he can't. I think he is better in the lane anyway. And in jungle, you know, you're going to struggle for gold with items, especially when you get to mid to late, where your camps are basically forfeit if you don't path towards them. So yeah, so I think his main lane is going to be mid lane. And I think he will be very good in top as well, but I think he'll be much harder to play in top due to things like I previously said, with things such as the walls and the minion waves being able to stack up in the ways they can. It means that there's a lot less walls, a lot less kind of opportunity for him to use his E in top lane, which I think his E is his identity. I think it's one of his main real abilities. Now, everybody's been focusing on the W more than anything because they think it's crazy, but like I mentioned, it's just because it's something different in the game that nobody's seen before. So this change makes people panic at a psychological level, and they panic to think this is busted. There's no way they're going to be able to ever win games with this champion in the game, when that's just not true. So either way, we'll move on to his W. So enemy champions that killed allied champions are marked as a scoundrel for 60 seconds, so a decent amount. Upon scoring a takedown against a scoundrel while alive, Akshan receives an additional 100 gold and revives all dead allied champions that were slain by the enemy champion after 1 second at their summoner platform, and removes the marks from all other enemies. Now, this is a really big thing though, because if in an ideal world, one member of the enemy team actually kills everyone and he revives them all, great. But he's also going to kind of run into the issue where if you're not good enough at the game to pilot a champion like this, who's to say you're not gonna accidentally one shot? You're gonna use your E in a certain way, accidentally one shot, say a support that maybe got a kill on, say your mid laner, and then say Darius got a kill on the other three members of your team. What's to say you don't revive that one person by accident? And then, I mean, it's also, say for example, say like, I don't know, for theory's sake, like a Karthus ends up running into him, I mean, it does remove all marks from other enemies, so I am reading that correct. So you can only revive people off one, but I mean, I think this is kind of gimmicky in a way. The early game, the respawn timers aren't really going to be high enough to warrant this, and also he's getting 100 bonus gold off people, but the way his kit works, he needs a lot more than 100 gold early, so it kind of ends up, it's going to be a nice little snowball mechanic, but it's not going to be that impactful. And again, early into the game, if you revive somebody, then it's not really going to make that much difference except for that extra gold. Now, another thing on top of that though is one of the big things people are saying is, what if, say for example, a Darius gets a quadra kill on your team and then he gets a kill and revives? Now obviously that is very bad, and that's kind of unlucky, but if a Darius can do something like that and get a quadra or even a penta, then he's already at the kind of stage in the game where he's so fed that even if you revive those team members, he's going to get such a huge amount of gold from, say, that quadra kill, that's still going to be really, really impactful for the game. And it's still going to mean that the next fight is not going to be easier, it's still going to be harder. Your team just, respawn earlier and get set up. So say for example, people saying that this will help to go and take an objective if the enemy team has just died. Well, yeah, but you still need to go and set that up. You still need to push waves out in order to get there, and you still need to control them. So if, say for example, they do just come along and kind of catch you on it, you're still going to be kind of in a situation where it's a 50-50. So this is obviously going to depend on respawn timers. If they've got a 50-second respawn timer, then obviously that is going to be impactful, but I feel like that's kind of the only thing that would give this champion a chance to do things later on into the game, because he's not going to have enough damage to actually blow people up unless he's already snowballed and ended the game at 20 minutes. So if he gets to a 30-40 minute game, I think he will really, really struggle, especially considering in team fights, if he tries to ult somebody, which we'll go on to later, his ult can be blocked by anything: towers, minions, absolutely anything. So if you're, say, fighting in the jungle, or you don't have a clear sight of them, then this could actually be really, really detrimental thing to him, because it'll mean that he can't really do that much in team fights. And he reminds me of kind of champions like Katarina, in the fact that if he gets his reset, he can do a lot, but that reset alone isn't gonna completely carry a team fight like it would with someone like Katarina. So the resets in the team fights do look and feel very fun, but overall, I don't think this W is gonna be as impactful as people actually think. Don't get me wrong, it's very strong, it's a very cool idea, it's going to make for some really fun kind of plays and really fun situations, but I think as an ability, it's, if your teammates are dying, then that's kind of bad at the first place, right? And especially in lower elos too, where you don't really want to be looking for team fights as much unless you're ridiculously ahead, which if you are ahead on this champion, great, you can look for them team fights really, really easy. But the thing with that is, if, say for example, you do go even or behind, God forbid you go behind, you're never really going to have the ability to come back into the game, because you're single target with pretty much everything, and you have pretty much absolutely no CC. So it's this champion's going to be very, I get 10 kills in 10 minutes or I just fall off sort of, which does then allow players that are really skilled to fill that gap. But anyway, let's go on, let's move on. So the active of it, he gains camouflage, which lasts for 2 seconds, or indefinitely while he's near terrain or inside a brush. Now this is really useful, but it is only camouflage, which means it does have a range, and the range of this isn't actually that big. So the detect range is only 800. So when we think of something like Caitlyn, or like a Caitlyn range, it's only slightly higher than Caitlyn's range. So overall, you're gonna basically be able to see him when he's coming towards you 9 times out of 10. The only thing that I think will stop that is if he, say, uses his camouflage on terrain, gets kind of close to you so you're outside of the 800 range, and then uses his E to kind of swing in and get you that way. So I think that could be one way that he is looked to play, and how people are probably going to navigate the fact that the detect radius on this is kind of small. I mean, if we look at, say, for example, Evelyn's detect radius, I think it's 700, yeah. So it's only slightly bigger than Eve's. And Eve is a champion that kind of has a gap closer and a way to stick to you with the E. So he doesn't really have that as much. So we'll see anyway. We'll see how that works. While going rogue and moving towards scoundrels, he gains bonus movement speed and bonus mana regen. Now this is huge, and this will help a lot because he is going to want to use things like his mana on the waves to get it pushed out really fast, so that he can kind of look for these rotations. So this is actually really handy because he's going to get a lot, and also then he has that opportunity that if he can rotate into, say, bot lane within 60 seconds, he can potentially revive that bot laner. So I actually think that this champion is gonna be less of a carry champion and more of a kind of supportive mid laner. I could see him just kind of going more supportive and just looking to kind of make up for teammates dying in side lanes, look to get rotations off, and I think that's probably the way it's going to go. But I feel like it's going to be very rare that this champion is going to be kind of the main carry of the game, especially considering a lot of his abilities, you know, are good at finishing people off, like his ultimate. But let's move on. So his E. Now, I think this is actually his most impactful ability, and I actually think this is the ability that's kind of going to make people so attracted to this champion, because it looks extremely fun to use, and it's pretty kind of handy. Now, it is very hard, so it's going to have quite a decent skill ceiling in my opinion, just because you need to know how it will react with every kind of section of the terrain around the map, which could be very hard, and it's going to take a lot of practice on this champion. So the active can activate a heroic swing 3 times before the ability goes on cooldown, and can use the third cast only after 0.5 seconds of the second. He may input a movement command to use the second and third cast respectively. Now the first cast fires a hook in the target direction, which grapples to the first instance of terrain for 1.5 seconds. Then the second cast can be used while the hook is attached. If he becomes immobilized or grounded during this time, the hook will detach and it will end. So not only this, but if he uses his swing and he swings into, say, an enemy or terrain, it will also end. So one of the things you can do is if Akshan ever uses this E to go in, you can actually just sit on top of him and, you know, he's going to have a very hard time. So the second cast, he swings around the terrain, rapidly firing at the nearest visible enemy to deal them physical damage and apply on hit and on attack effects at 25% effectiveness per shot, and stopping upon colliding with an enemy champion or terrain, or after 3 seconds. So here we see enemy champion or terrain. So this is going to be one of the big things that's going to be how you shut him down. These big beefy tanks like the Zac and even the Malphite and things like that, they're going to be able to basically shut him down very easily by just being big, which is, you know, Frostfire Gauntlet users are going to love playing into him. So, I mean, that could be really fun. So, will be knocked down by any immobilizing crown control during the dash. So, we said that. So, the third cast, he jumps off the rope in the target direction, fires one last shot at a nearby visible enemy. So, that's just kind of that last little bit of damage. But if the second section gets cancelled, then the third section doesn't go off, which that is quite a considerable amount of his damage. Which, you know, is going to be, I mean, it's still something, right? And especially when he's building crit, it's going to be even more important. So the cooldown resets upon scoring a takedown against an enemy champion. The shot benefits from critical strike, which again, like I previously mentioned, is why I think this champion really needs to build crit, but that ends up with him being very kind of bad into a lot of lethality users, because their build path is very easy: longsword, 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 keep repeating, go out, get one kill or push one wave, and then reset, you can get another longsword, you instantly have stats in lane. That's what makes things like Zed actually really, really strong, especially considering Zed later on into his build can go defensive items as well, or kind of more bruisery style items. So this champion can't do that because he needs that crit, and, you know, crit is quite expensive. And apply lifesteal at 100% effectiveness, which is really nice. It means that you can say use your E to get away from somebody and heal up. So he's going to be hard to catch if you play it properly, and he's going to be hard to get away from as well. Kind of, I think that kind of reminds you somewhat of kind of like a Warwick, where if he's chasing you down, the likelihood is that he gets you is very, very high if he plays it properly. So that's kind of the vibe I get from that. So prioritizes firing enemy champions with stacks of dirty fighting, which is his passive. So if you say get an auto off and then you E after them, you're gonna target them because because of how it works. Will not fire if he's channeling comeuppance, which is his ultimate, and reveals himself during the swing. So again, I think this is going to be his bread and butter ability. I think this is actually the thing that's going to determine a really good Akshan versus a really bad Akshan. So this is actually where the main power of this champion actually is. This, even though this is what everybody's talking about because Riot made it look cool and Riot made it look, fancy that he can revive people, like that is where everybody's focusing, when it's not really the thing that makes a champion. Now, another thing to also mention too is that all of his abilities, except for the magic damage that he gets out of his passive, everything is pretty much AD. Now, the problem with that is that if, say, for example, in the kind of current meta where you have things early like Zin and Volibear and even things like the Udyr that have a very large amount of kind of early game pressure, that then means that some of the kind of mage junglers can't really play as well if, say, you have an AD mid. So obviously you want to try and offset as much as possible your kind of AP AD balance. Like if you've got, say, an AP mid and jungle, then they get a lot more value out of things like mercs, which is a really, really big issue. But in general, I think that if you end up playing him a lot, you end up with a lot of AD mids, forcing your jungler onto something AP most of the time, especially at kind of like a higher level of play, which if then, say, you get picked, like if they pick, say, a Xin Zhao into that or a Volibear, then that mage jungler is going to have quite a hard time. And even though Akshan does have quite a lot of wave clear on his Q, I'm not entirely sure if this is going to be enough for him to outpush a lot of the kind of meta mids. And I still think that things like Lucian and Zed and things like that are going to just give him too hard of a time. Yasuo, I think, is going to completely ruin him to the point that Yasuo, you also have things in the meta very heavily like Zac Jungle, which are very good for Yasuo too. So I feel like if somebody actually picks Akshan, say, early in a draft in competitive or pro play, then they're just going to get met with something like a Yasuo Zac or kind of like a Zed mid or anything, because as long as he doesn't get ahead early, you kind of win. So this is kind of where the cracks are kind of showing, and this is kind of what's making me think that I don't think this champion's actually going to be that good. Based on what I've seen so far and based on how his kit actually works. So his ultimate is very interesting and it looks really satisfying. He channels for 2.5 seconds, locking onto the target enemy champion, revealing them, which is very important. It's true sight as well, which is really, really big. It means that even if, say, they go invisible, it doesn't matter. And storing bullets into his weapon as well as revealing himself, which means, again, this is going to mean that he can also get really heavily punished. Now, I would be interested to see what would happen if, say, somebody picked, say, Caitlyn into Akshan, because she can punish him very hard in the laning phase. She's also AD, and he's got such a low range that unless he can get on top of her consistently without her pushing the wave harder than him, then I think he's really struggling to those. But I think overall just AD mids are just hard for him. As well as comeuppance can be recast after 0.5 seconds during the channel and does so automatically at the end of its duration. Comeuppance is placed on a 15-second cooldown if the channel is cancelled, which is really good. It means you're not going to lose this big 100-second cooldown if, say, somebody one-shots who you were trying to kill. So that's really good. So when it's recast, it fires all the stored bullets at the target. You're dealing physical damage to the first enemy hit, including structures, and increased by 0 to 300% based on the target's missing health. So this is very good for finishing somebody off, but it can be cancelled by pretty much anything. It does say including structures, and I'm pretty sure I saw somewhere that this also includes minions. Oh yes, here we go. So each bullet benefits from crit strike. Again, this is why he's going to be a crit user, and critical damage modifiers at 50% effectiveness. Now this is okay. I mean, he fires a ton of bullets, so it's kind of okay that it's at 50% effectiveness, and applies lifesteal at 80% effectiveness. This just means he's not going to be able to completely heal his entire life bar, but he is going to still heal quite a lot of it from this ability, and executes minions. So it can hit minions as well. It will execute them. You could maybe potentially use this as kind of a way to clear the wave. Like, if he wasn't so dependent on gold, I think that would kind of be one of his defining factors as something like a support, is the fact that you could maybe target the enemy and then use all these bullets to just instantly clear a wave and reset. I think you can still do that anyway on him in mid lane, which could also be very good. Again, like I said, top lane he could be very good as well, especially for setting up dives, because this champion is very much a diving champion. He wants to be under their turret, doing as much damage as possible, and just basically being a nuisance early game while he can, because later on into the game he's not going to be able to do that. So I think his playstyle is going to be very similar to something like Lucian slash Talon, in the fact that he has very high kill pressure early, but that falls off significantly, and he also has the ability to roam into side lanes. Now, I think everybody's seeing this champion as kind of a carry. I don't think the way this kind of kit is designed, this champion is going to be a carry. I think he's more going to be kind of like a roaming champ, but again, I think in a high elo that's also not going to really work as much, because say if bot lane don't see him in mid lane and they know he's either reset or he's just roaming, then they could just kind of back off, wait for him to show, and then continue a fight. So I think at high level play he's really not going to be that good, but I do think he's going to be a very, very fun kind of solo queuish champion. I don't think he's really going to see that much pro play unless people really start hammering down on this kind of rotating its side lanes and just using your W to revive people. But the thing is with his W is it's going to revive somebody, sure, but that person's still dead. So they still died in that lane. So if, say, for example, he comes along and kills them, they're still going to end up with more total gold from the exchange than what the enemy is. So maybe if there's a good way for it, then great. But again, I feel like this champion is going to be very, very hard to actually play. And there's a lot of things in his kit that just don't really seem great, and he's going to struggle, like I said, into a lot of AD mids that have better back timings. His back timings aren't going to be that great. He's going to need to get a pickaxe on one of those backs, which in mid lane can be really, really deadly. If he's playing into a mage, great. Now, I do think the way his kit is orientated, he is going to be like better into mages, and I do think he might have a place as like a counter pick into like a mage mid, purely because he has the ability to stick to them. He can do a lot of damage. His back timers are kind of okay in comparison with some mages. Like, he can still get some long swords towards, say, Gale Force, things like that. Whereas mages, they need kind of like their Lost Chapter, they need Blasting Wand. So I do think he'll be very good in squishing mages, but I only think he'll ever be a counter pick or like a snowbally solo queue pick, like a Katarina or a Talon or something like that. So that's what I think of the champion from first look. I think he's going to be very, very fun, like very fun, and he's going to have very big windows to just do some amazing things, which is what the game needs. And there's so many people that have been kind of going off or sending me messages saying, do you think that the game is ruined because of this champion? And I've seen people saying that they're going to quit the game over this champion, when it's like there's always the option to ban them, which obviously there's a load of other champions, but then there's no point complaining or feeling bad about a champion that isn't even out yet when you don't know how they're actually going to play on live. Even PBE coverage is not accurate, because on PBE you have challenger players playing on PBE against silvers. So it's like anybody that's, say, very high elo or makes content can make the champion look very, very good on PBE while it's unbalanced. But then when they actually bring that into the live game and they go into balanced matchmaking, then you'll actually see where the champion is good, where he's bad. I do think he will have a little bit of a low win rate when he is released, purely because he does look like a very difficult and awkward champion to actually pilot. And I think there's going to be a very large amount of skill expression in this champion, which is great, and that's always fun. And you can tell that Riot have made this champion with that kind of big flashy thing in mind. I do think they'll end up buffing him until he ends up being seen in pro play, because champions like this that have this big kind of these fancy things to them, those are the champions that they actually want at, say, Worlds, right? Because at Worlds they want to show off what they've done that year. Like, the thing people don't realize is this game is free, and there's so many careers and stuff that people make out of this game, but Riot still need to find a way to make this game fresh and make this game interesting and make it so that you actually want to watch it and you enjoy watching it. Like, as soon as he gets picked up in Pro, there will, well, if he gets picked up, don't get me wrong, I don't think he will in his current state, but I think with a few buffs, maybe. Or maybe he will. Maybe I'm just overlooking something, and he is massive. Another thing I did want to mention too, though, this passive, which does seem pretty good, his autos seem really, really slow and really clunky. And even though he does get that movement speed after the first one, if he wants to pump out maximum damage, then he is going to have to stand still, and that could maybe result in him being very vulnerable to kind of CC. If you say stand still to get that second auto, you could say a Thresh could just flash forward, EQ him, and he could potentially die from that. So I do think that overall, the champion is going to be very fun. And like I was previously saying, like, Riot want all of their new champions that year to be played at Worlds, because that's kind of a show of what they've managed to do and accomplish in that year. So if you're kind of like a web or like a games developer and you're pumping out nothing new, nothing fresh every year, then, you know, people are going to start thinking, is this actually worth investment, and is this actually worth paying for? So it does seem very kind of Riot are adding all these things that they don't need to. They're overcomplicating the game, but I mean, it's not really getting that overcomplicated. There's a lot to read and there's a lot to do, but if anything, that should incite people to want to learn how these things work, which I think a lot of people don't want to do. People would prefer to complain about why they think a champion's busted than to kind of look and see why it's actually not, or how they can play into it, stuff like that, you know? So, like I said, there's going to be a lot of counters to this champion, and I don't think he can be blind picked. And I think that's actually going to be a really big thing that's going to keep his win rate down as well, is the fact that if he's blind picked, like, over and over when he's not really a champion that can be, people are going to win because others don't know what they're doing on the or what the champion does. But at the same time, as soon as people start realizing what it does, then I think we'll see a massive kind of drop in win rate, and I think he will probably stabilize at maybe a 48-49% maximum is what I'm gonna guess. But again, I think in the right hands, in the hands of somebody that's very mechanically good, he can be very, very good. So I think he's very fun. He's a very fun champion. He brings something new and something fresh and something that you can create strategies and counters and you can actually have fun with. I also think that, funny enough, the main problem that I actually have with this champion isn't anything to do with this champion. It's that I think Viego is in a position right now where he's a little bit too strong, and giving him this, and this, especially the W, that could actually make Viego just way more busted. So I think that's something to take into consideration, and I think that's the only thing that I actually don't like about this champion, which is kind of funny because he's a new champion. He's very packed full of new things, and again, I think he's going to be very fun, but he's going to be very easy to counter and very easy to play into. So if he doesn't get very ahead early, then, you know. And if he gets picked with an AD jungler, there's massive value in plated steel caps, and if he's picked with into double AP, then he's just going to be able to burst them a lot. So I think a good mix is going to be good, but I do think the champion is going to be very fun, and you know, it will see a lot of playing solo queue, but I think in a professional setting, I really don't think he's going to be that good. Like, there's way too many drawbacks about him, there's way too many things that are going to counter him, and even the things that he wants to build or likes to build, it doesn't really align with the playstyle and the lane that he needs to be played in. Like I said, I think top lane probably a little easier, because again, ranged into a melee top laner, that is much easier to actually deal with, and you end up with this massive aggression into top laners. But again, melee mids he might be able to do a lot into as well, but I think things like Lucian is still going to be just a better version, but we shall see. So anyway, that's kind of like my breakdown on this new champion. I think he's great. I think he's going to make the game very fun to watch, and he's going to be very fun to play. So yeah, so that's that. I'll speak to you again soon.